welcome. I think we're now broadcasting, which is great. So good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is James Rosenshine, and I'm your host for CUI Over Coffee today. So CUI Over Coffee aims to bring together people from the CUI asset integrity management community across the globe to share ideas, experiences, or just get things simply off our chest. So it's great to start season 2. And you may be wondering actually, where is Praful Sharma? Praful Sharma, you'd be pleased to know, he's actually on our panel. So instead of Praful, you have me, less good looking, but hopefully we'll be able to still be able to get some input from Praful today. So talking about our distinguished guests, let's start by asking asking the guests if they can introduce themselves. So I will start with Ollie Petter. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I can do it. I'm working at Tampnet with the Internet of Things. I've been working in telecom for 20 years, 10, 15 of these with IoT related stuff, working with both vendors and from the operator side as customers. And now working in Tampnet with business development and technical development of Internet of Things.
Excellent. And can I call you Ollie?
That's okay.
Every time I mention Ollie, I have that Manchester United song in my head about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. But
yeah,
I'll call you Ollie.
That's a good way of putting it.
And let me introduce it, or give the opportunity for Rohit to introduce himself.
Yeah. Hi everyone, Rohit Khanna here. Been with LTI for almost 2 years now. Oil and gas industry experience of almost 20 years. Pardon me. And started my career as a Schlumberger field engineer. Been with oil and gas consulting practices of different companies. And currently I represent LTI as a consultant.
Thank you, Rohit. And am I right to say it's Happy Diwali?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's almost there now, day after tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Excellent, and Happy Diwali to some of our guests and our customer in India. And Praful Sharma, last but not least, if you could introduce yourself again.
Yeah, hi, thank you, James. My name is Praful Sharma. I'm the CTO of Corrosion Radar, and I'm on a mission to bring innovative digital solutions to asset integrity community, especially corrosion and insulation being the biggest use case. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you all. So before we introduce the topic of today and also a bit of housekeeping, let's just remind ourselves on what were some of the key takeaways from season 1 and why we've brought the guest that we have today onto the panel. So season 1, one of the key takeaways is that we all agreed that we need to take a holistic approach to asset integrity management. We need to get the best out of all the wonderful work that's going on already around mitigation. We need to leverage some of the exciting developments in digital technology, such as monitoring prediction. We also need to leverage more what our IT teams are doing around infrastructure and some initiatives around digital twins, for example. So it's definitely a holistic approach. It requires a systems thinking. It also requires improved collaboration. One of the things that we recognize that we need to improve collaboration. So it's important that we look at the ecosystem. I think I recognize that typically people in the CUI domain, we're all specialists and we all typically will work in silos. So I think what digitalization is getting people to start to do is to think outside the box, start to look around us and understand how can we evolve our own jobs? How can we start to leverage what is going on elsewhere within our organization? So hopefully we can bring that today by getting you to think differently and introduce some initiatives you may not even know about or companies. Okay, so the topic of today is the rise of connected sensors. Thought-provoking, and it does sound like an epic Star Wars movie, but we won't be bringing you Skywalker. Instead, we will be bringing you the panel guest that we've got today. but it is about reality. And the reality is, based on the market conditions now and in the future in oil and gas, petrochemical and chemical industries, that we need to optimize what we're doing. And if that comes down to optimizing inspection and maintenance, this is something we need to think about. And it's great that we can have a discussion around this today. One thing that I wanted to just get across now and for you to think about in the panel is, whilst digital technologies brings us lots of opportunity, my worry, it brings lots of complexity too. So are we adding more complexity to a problem? So let's start with the first question. Well, let's start with housekeeping. So just to quickly say that we'll be spending up to 30 minutes of debate, and then we also will be afterwards doing a Q&A for about 15 minutes. So keep it high level and then go into a bit of detail. We're also recording the session as well, and you probably know now, you experienced in asking questions using the Q&A and chat. Maybe put your hand up, we might pass the mic to some people. Right, so first and foremost, I'd like to say, enjoy your cup of coffee. I presume, Rohit, you're drinking masala tea there in India?
Yes, it's masala tea time.
And Ollie, what do you drink in Norway?
For the moment, it's coffee, but we also drink beer in the evening.
Very good.
I'm having my mate, which I picked up from some of my South American friends.
You're very cultured, Praful. Excellent. So corrosion and insulation is still a headache, costly for most of us, still a pain. We're still talking about it. But now there's a wider ecosystem growing, which can hopefully help us, whether we look to the IoT industry or other digital type technologies and companies. And sensors have been around for a long time. I mean, I've got a sensor at the moment on my watch, and it's telling me my heart rate is 57. But what does that mean in the context of things? I need to understand more about what actually am I doing and the calories I've taken and the stress I'm under. So, you know, is data in isolation any good? And that brings me on to my question around IoT. You know, what is the big deal about IoT? Everyone talks about it. Can we contextualize what IoT means in the oil and gas sector and how it relates to sensors? If I can start with Ollie.
Yeah, basically it's of course providing sensor data, information, insight into different areas of your production or your transport of oil and gas, for example. Currently there are of course a lot of sensors locally controlled, often in rigs or platforms, production areas. From our side, we are working closely to get more and more wireless connectivity and to increase the number of sensors, basically. That being said, it's all about the data again, to get more data, to get more insight, and to do the right decisions and to predict and prevent hazardous or inefficiencies. Yeah, so it's basically the advent of massive IoT, where you use a lot of sensors distributed and have a much shorter time to deployment by using, for example, our cellular networks, which could easily cover a platform and connect any kind of device wirelessly.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of connection there and a lot of a need to provide some reliability in regards to that connectivity in regards to IoT. And Rohit, very quickly.
Yeah. So as most of our audience would know, IoT is very relevant in production area of oil and gas, right? And in the context of oil and gas industry, the way I would look at it is it encompasses the application, processes, hardware, infrastructure, sensors, instrumentation, all bound together in a manner that it brings complete efficiency into operations, right? So whether you're talking about drilling operations or production operations or any sort of operations in oil and gas industry, IoT is meant to provide you efficiency.
Okay, well, that's obviously a key word there that everyone is constantly looking at in terms of how can we be more efficient, especially now. And it'd be good actually to understand, we in CUI Over Coffee Season 1, we all talk about CUI as a problem we all know. But it's interesting actually to understand from people like yourself, coming from the IT side and angle, when you're looking at the oil and gas, petrochemical, chemical industries, you know, CUI, is that something that is well known as a problem? What's your view on the problem of CUI, Rohit?
Indeed, CUI is indeed a major problem area, right? From perspective of oil and gas, and if you look at it from business angle, right? Look at how CUI has costed billions of dollars in real losses, right? Take example few scenarios, right? An unmonitored CUI can actually cause a valve to break down, leading to an emergency shutdown in North Sea for 2 days worth of production, right? What does that mean? Let's say if a platform is producing 20,000 barrels a day, this translates to a loss of, at the current price, maybe a loss of $1 million almost, or maybe more, right? Now, can an operator afford to lose $1 million worth of revenue in today's cost scenario? Probably not, right? Look at the other aspects. What are the other aspects of CUI not being monitored? You're putting lives at risk in case of accidents, possible incidents, right? If CUI is not monitored, you have there are cascading effects on other equipment, right? If an equipment has failed, right, it can lead to failure of equipment continuously that are associated with the failed equipment, right? So it could lead to a severe loss for the operators, particularly small operators, right? So it makes sense for them to actually invest money in CUI. That's how I would look at it from business angle. James.
Thank you, Rohit. And Ollie, again, coming from the telecoms side of things, CUI, what's your view on the problem?
Yeah, basically it's as Rohit says, this is something that could cause great costs and hazardous situations. And as with many sensors, it's important to have a frequent kind of reading of the parameters you are looking at. And typically corrosion is one of the parameters that today is a lot of manual labor. It's periodic or incidental at some times. When it's inspected and when certain defects are checked. What's also kind of a part of this is that when corrosion occurs, it could live on for some time, but you get to a threshold. And this threshold could be quite fast escalation of the problem. So you can kind of live it with for many years, and it kind of gradually escalates with the problem. But since you don't monitor it, since you don't know the problem is there, you could get to a threshold where the problem suddenly becomes really huge and costly, instead of having a monitoring system that tells you continuously the state of your pipe or your tank or whatever, to avoid this kind of escalation of the problem.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So what I've taken from both Rohit and Ollie, you recognise how a small problem, like a bit of moisture or signs of corrosion, how that can escalate, and there's an issue with the compounded costs of not actually dealing with that issue early on. And so that is something which is good that you recognise that, looking at this industry. Okay, so and just out of interest, why, Ollie and Rohit, why is it Tampnet and LTI joined at the hip? Can you quickly just explain that, Ollie, in a couple of sentences?
Yeah, Tampnet is a company that supplies communication and connectivity to a huge number of platforms. We have typically today we have 400 installations providing communication to platforms and rigs. And of course, it's in our interest to utilize this communication as much as possible.
Okay.
To do this, it's important for us to be able to do more than just being a communication or connectivity provider. We need to find the right ecosystems to be able to deliver services to the end customer in an ecosystem where we go together with either sensor vendors or different partners. But the main goal is to provide the end service to the customer. And then LTI was the natural choice for us to partner up with, because they have vast experience from oil and gas, and they've been working with us closely to kind of figure out the landscape of sensors and solutions, and also the data integration towards the back-end systems. So after a close reckoning of the market, LTI was the chosen vendor or partner for us to do this work and to work towards the ecosystems that deliver the data.
So thank you, Ollie. So what I've just taken from what you just said there is there is a need for a company like LTI to help Tampnet simplify the way that oil and gas and I presume it would be similar to downstream, not just upstream but downstream petrochemical. That they need a solution approach and something that can simplify consuming solutions like sensors as part of an overall solution. And it's about, I presume, it's about speeding the time to value too. So
yeah,
for that. So I'm dying to ask Praful a question, but before we do, it might be worth actually starting just the first poll, just so that we get a sense of the audience that we're talking to and is online now. So the poll will just ask some simple questions about exactly which areas do you work in, and we want to be able to address this topic of rise of connected sensors for all of you. And irrespective of which region you're in. So please vote, or at least just tell us which categories you're in, and that will help us in terms of our delivery. Thank you. So whilst people are just filling that out, maybe we move on to a burning question that I have, and it'd be good to start with you, Praful, on this. We always think about, well, how can we do things differently? And when I hear about Rohit and Ollie talking about their initiative, it just makes me feel like there's so much to do. And where do you start? It's kind of like the chicken and egg syndrome. Do you start with working out what is the infrastructure you need for IoT in the North Sea, in the offshore, or in the downstream? Do you start with the infrastructure in mind, or do you start with the business cases and use cases like CUI? It'd be good, Praful, if you could just share your view on that, please.
Sure.
Well, I mean, how can we do things
sorry.
differently? So, I mean, automation have always been there, and IoT, when we say industrial IoT, what is different here is the affordability of systems to be deployed at a mass scale is much higher now, because the cost of deployment of the systems and analytics is much easier, much cheaper than before. So earlier, the problems which were expensive to solve, and now they are becoming affordable in the industries. Corrosion is a big example of that, because corrosion traditionally have been managed in a very manual manner. There's a lot of labor involved, because when you install a sensor for, say, corrosion monitoring, it used to be very expensive because of kind of wires needed, infrastructure needed, softwares needed. But now in the era of industrial IoT, all those technologies are becoming more affordable. What is needed is, for individual cases, they need to be, the solutions, sensors needs to be made for those individual cases. And what we see now from Corrosion Radar, we see corrosion, especially corrosion under insulation, being one of the biggest use cases of automation technologies or industrial IoT technologies, where can we move manual ways of assessing the risk of the assets to more automated? Can we find more data about the asset? Now, this data is expensive, used to be expensive. Now it's becoming available, affordable, wireless technologies, making it easier to deploy sensors.
Okay. So now it's affordable. We should, am I right in saying people who've got a business problem and need to explore how IT can help, they should be able to go to IT and say, can you provide me a affordable IT solution for my needs? Okay, and whilst we before we go to Ollie, just a reminder to make sure everyone has completed the poll one before we then go further with some more polls. Ollie, so What comes first? What's your experience? And no doubt you will say telecoms and infrastructure.
Of course, of course. Well, it's as previously said, it's all about the data available. Previously, it's been kind of a reactive approach where you have kind of either manual gauges or you have some kind of control on the platform or the rig, and you react based on something happening. What you want to do is basically to have a connectivity both to the local kind of operations, but also to the remote operations sitting on shore, for example, to make sure that you have the data that makes you able to predict these things happening. So that's much about the connectivity, of course. And as also mentioned, the cost of both data and connectivity and software for analyzing the data and the sensors, of course, have drastically reduced the costs. So the data cost has been much, much cheaper and lower than any time before. And that means you can have much more data and make the right predictions that was actually not possible before, because the cost was higher than actually the efficiency gain you got.
Okay. So again, people just need to recognize that due to advancements in IoT and the cost has come down considerably, we need to probably be, certainly in the CUI community, we need to embrace more these initiatives with our IT instrumentation departments and start to drive initiatives. So that's useful. Let's just quickly look at the poll results, just so we've got a feel for who's actually in the audience. And no surprise, we've got in the upstream, good 43% of people are from that side of the industry. No midstream, downstream 17%, others 37%. So I presume there's going to be quite a lot of people who are coming in from the IoT side of things. And again, there's a good healthy mix of people across the world, but again, majority in Europe and Russia. So that's great to understand that. Coming on to Rohit, just to finally speak to you about, as a system integrator, where do you see a company being able to just get going with looking at sensors as a service, addressing CUI as a problem? Should we be getting people from the IT side to drive this as an IT initiative, or should be more from the business?
I think it makes sense to have people from the business, right? Because and the team that you form is always going to comprise of a healthy mix of people coming from business as well as IT side, right? Because when we talk about let's say an end-to-end solution, you've got to have connectivity, you've got to have infrastructure, you've got to have sensors, and then the mobility and apps, right? So if you look at these four components, you need to have a healthy mix of people who can not only just assess the problem, but also be aware of the solutions that are existing in the market, right? So sensors is just one part of it, connectivity being another. It's imperative that people do understand what's required for the whole solution to come alive, right? So mobility, you definitely need a skill set, right? You need to have an understanding of how are you going to translate the solution into dashboards, KPIs, as well as make it useful for the end user. So I guess someone with an experience of looking at a business problem and someone coming from industry would be able to take a lead and then decide on what kind of skill sets would be required for a typical solution to come alive.
Okay, no, thank you, Rohit. It'd be good to maybe launch the second poll whilst we go into the mid-section and final section of our discussion. So if we can just launch the second poll. Thank you. Some interesting questions here. It'd be good to look at these questions now, based on the answers, we can have an interesting discussion about that at the end of our session. And it'd be good to probably talk about hardware, because we hear about sensors, we hear about wireless gateways and infrastructure, and surely we should be moving away from hardware. Surely we should be reducing as much as possible the hardware footprint on our platforms, in our plants. You know, when we hear about spot sensors, you think, oh God, how many of those are going to be put onto our assets? And it just maybe scares me a bit about this. And I just wonder, Ollie, it might be good to ask you, how do we limit or control the amount of hardware we're suggesting to go into our plants?
Well, basically, I guess it's very important to kind of make a target or a future goal of what you want to monitor and what kind of data you need and what kind of approach you do to transport and analysis of the data. So basically, it's about making the right choice of hardware initially. Firstly, so you don't have to do continuous kind of upgrades or changes and so on. Also to make that you have a platform or a hardware platform that can grow and can adapt to the future needs that you may have. But then it's important to identify these future needs and try to think ahead to make sure you have a platform that can live for more than a couple of years. Ideally, like at least 5 to 7 years, even if it's evolving very quickly or more or less a revolution of sensors coming in. At least try to have a future view of your needs to adapt and make sure you do the right hardware choices. Yeah.
And Praful, we talk about the ability to power these wireless devices and system nodes, but surely, again, for me, that starts to make me worry about the power involved to utilize these types of technologies. Now, how can we optimize power? How can we reduce the footprint of all these wireless gateways?
Well, I mean, the advancements of industrial IoT allows us to put battery-powered devices into the field. So that's one. Battery-powered devices reduces the footprint of how much wire connectivity is needed, both in terms of power as well as data connectivity. Second is we need to have a hardware which lasts very long in the oil and gas industry, say 50, 20 years, more than 10 years, with reliably operating. And that's the need, because the kind of problems we're dealing with, especially in corrosion, is a long-term problem. It's not like catastrophic immediate problem. So it's okay to have the data coming in batches. It's not real time because corrosion is a slow process, but it's important. Reliability is more important. Second is the long-term aspects of corrosion is a slow process. So the data available of that period of time. So when we say hardware, that's more important to me. And how can oil and gas industry adopt this battery powered and long-term effects in mind?
Okay, thank you. Just to remind you again about the polls, it'd be good to understand the sentiment and your feelings in regards to those questions, so we can come back to it at the end. And Rohit, again, what's your view on this paranoia that I have about there being just too much hardware and it driving more complexity?
I think the industry needs to evolve also. I mean, and they are technologically evolving as well, right? Advancing according to what the needs of the customers are, and you'll notice that a lot of sensors, measurements are now being clubbed together, right? So to optimize the hardware, you could be looking at, for example, a hub, right, which will take 5 or 6 measurements together. Right, for a valve monitoring kind of a sensor, you could have a temperature, pressure, flow rate, position, all being merged into one. Right, so that is one way of optimizing the hardware, and the industry needs to, IIoT particular sensor partners, vendors like those of you, right? You need to think a little bit harder on how can I optimize the hardware and make more measurements, derive better value for the customer with the minimal hardware, right? So I think that's one way of
Okay.
optimizing the hardware. Yeah.
So that's interesting to mention about multiple measurements of one wireless device, and that makes me think about a good question for Praful later around calibrating data. But you mentioned value too. So, you know, moving on to the final part, and if you haven't voted, please keep voting. You know, companies now, operators are looking to their services companies and technology vendors to say, right, deliver value. You know, we need to see value and better business outcomes. So let's take a sensor as a service marketplace. How can we align that with multiple sensor vendors and the approach if, you know, if basically our end users are demanding value and you've got different vendors all come together under one marketplace? Maybe I'll ask Rohit first. What's your view on that?
Sure. If you look at the LTI and Tampnet ecosystem that we've built, the starting point was how can we reduce the turnaround time for a typical project? If you look at it from oil and gas operators' perspective, right, the intention was always to look for you know, a group that can actually solve multiple problems simultaneously. Now the problem could be either, you know, you look at what would it take to bring a solution alive. It would take sensors, connectivity, software, operating conditions, safety requirements, certification, and then running a successful proof of concept, right? If a typical operator decides to take on an IoT project, typically it would take anywhere from 3 months to 6 months or even more of lead time just to finalize each of these components. And then you decide that okay, you know, let's start a POC, right? A proof of concept. I'm talking about new technology and new ideas here, right? For established ones, probably a different approach works where the sensors are more established and the operation technology is already proven, right? Yeah. So the idea that we built was to create some sort of a catalog to reduce this turnaround time.
Understood. Right. Okay. So you're basically targeted to bring that value quicker to the market with proven solutions and a more integrated approach. Okay. Understood. Yeah. And again, just before we go into the final section, if you haven't voted, please do. But Ollie, it would be good to understand again from your point of view. And we talk about sensor as a service marketplace. What's the abbreviation you're going to come up with? Because you can't use SaaS, can you?
No, that's right. So we've looked at all different angles, and this far I think Sense AAS is the best word just yet, but we haven't finally decided what's best there. I don't think there's an industry standard yet, so maybe we'll make the industry standard together with LTI.
Okay, interesting. But Sense as a marketplace, Sense as a service marketplace. How do Tampnet see what you're creating, being able to deliver value, and how do you align value across multiple vendors?
Yeah, we've seen from meeting, especially the large oil companies, there has been kind of a few years or many years where everybody's been talking about IoT and IoT strategies and automation, and also related, of course, to the green kind of wave of being more efficient and having less carbon footprint and so on. But there's been a lot of strategic work made. What we've seen when we visit a customer and say that we have a good connectivity network where they're at, they are asking for, one of our sales guys always use the term tangible solutions. That means moving away from a lot of the strategy work done by the large consultancy companies and actually coming in with solutions that are something you can look and feel and test and verify. And that's kind of the main driver behind the sensor catalog, that we work together with LTI to find the sensors, then we test them, make sure that they work in our network, and then do proof of concepts with the customer.
Okay.
to really address and show the true value of the solution. So that's why we also focus on use cases instead of specific sensors. We focus on the use cases, like, for example, with you guys with corrosion monitoring as a use case, because it's easy for the customer to understand the value and the use of such a sensor solution.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned about the need to obviously again align the value across the different sensors, and you mentioned Rohit about multiple measurements. And I even made a joke at the start saying it's all well and good knowing my heart rate, but I need to know more information and contextualize that. So that's a question I've got for Praful. What's the opportunity in collaborating on multiple sensor data, whether it's CUI related, corrosion management related, or anything else that you've seen?
Well, I mean, that's a unique aspect about what's happening now compared to what happened in the previous era. So previous era, as I mentioned, automation has always been there, but it's typically served by one single company doing end-to-end in a CapEx model, right? Supplying the hardware, doing integration, doing analytics and dashboard. So that's how all the industries have been built over decades. But now what we are seeing in the industrial IoT era is the horizontalization of the process, where different companies specializing in different technologies are joining together to provide services, solutions to the end user. And that opens up new opportunities for solving new problems. And you mentioned about joining different types of data. That's an outcome of that as well. Can we use temperature sensor data provided by some other supplier combined with, say, corrosion monitoring by, say, Corrosion Radar, combined with, say, connectivity provided by, for example, TempNet, integrated by, say, LTI, again, analytics provided by, say, companies, even Corrosion Radar providing some predictive models. So you see how different components are joining together, and that's possible in the era of industrial IoT. And this is no different than what we have been used to in mobile industry. Pay as you go, SIM card connectivity being provided by someone else, mobile phones being provided by someone else, right?
Okay.
Ultimate services by someone else. So kind of, this is a new era.
And that's interesting. You mentioned other industries. Rohit, I presume LTI, have you implemented a Center as a Service marketplace initiative in other industries?
Yes, we have taken this concept to other industries like construction. We, in fact, our parent company is a shining example of where this approach has been proved successful. L&T has tested close to 50,000 such deployments across its own ecosystem. So yeah, we are very confident that this will be successful as well.
So construction, I imagine construction is a good example. Okay.
Yeah.
And very quickly, let's wrap up because I'm conscious of time, and there's quite a few questions coming in, and feel free to continue to ask some really good questions. So let's ask Ollie, give me a couple of good use cases for Sensor as a Service marketplace.
Well, of course, corrosion monitoring is a hot topic as we're talking today. But also we see that typically vibration monitoring, for example, where you have rotary engines and so on, is where you can very early predict any kind of maintenance or happenings and avoid them at a very early stage and do kind of the maintenance or the replacement long time before this actually makes a problem. Valve monitoring has been mentioned. There you can get quite easy solutions today, which are kind of retrofit and very short time.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Excellent. And quickly, Rohit, a couple of use cases. You're on mute.
Yeah, we could be looking at we could be looking at remote inspections and inventory management offshore as a couple of use cases, or smart living quarters as in the services industry as a use case as well.
Okay, good. Well, let's wrap up. Let's close the poll. So have we got the results on the poll? Okay, interesting. So let's start with what are the barriers you see in implementing a CY monitoring system network? So a network of monitoring systems, and we just use CY as an example. Okay, developing a business case. I definitely see, obviously, there's a lot more work that needs to be doing on that. And that means that we need to continue to listen and understand the challenges and to be able to quantify that and put business cases together. Availability of infrastructure, interesting again. Maybe companies are wanting to implement multiple sensors, but they're are still waiting for the maturity for the IT infrastructure to mature and be made available. Reliability of connection. Okay, so I thought reliability might be seen as a barrier, but it seems to be a lot of work that's gone on there around reliability. And looking at the second question, how do you best describe your company IoT strategy? Standardized and maturing, okay, only 12%. Now this is interesting, mixed approaches. Now I actually would have said if there was one answer, it would be mixed approaches, because certainly when I talk to customers, there is lots of different approaches and companies still haven't really worked out what is the best strategic approach moving forwards. It's an evolving and quick and then fast-paced market. Immature, okay, interesting again, 20%, and again, a lot of people still just actually don't know what's going on, maybe within their own organisation, which again is interesting to know. What do you see as the biggest opportunity with the sensor service marketplace? Guaranteed connection reliability, but one thing, okay, which has come out on top is time to value. So I think there's a good recognition there, Ollie and Petter, in terms of your approach, and I'm sure there are other approaches too, to simplify and package some of these sensor technologies and infrastructure. Just to quickly get your views on this, Rohit.
Oh, can you repeat the question? I missed.
So yeah, we mentioned about the biggest opportunity being with the sensor service marketplace, time to value. I bet you're pleased to hear that's what companies recognise is a good outcome from what you're doing. Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, if you look at the ROI, right, the value of coming out, a business value coming out of an IoT project, anything beyond 12 months is for a positive ROI needs to be relooked. That's how we evaluated our ecosystem, right? We need to have a short ROI for a business value to be delivered.
That's good to hear. And Ollie, are you surprised about the fact that there is mixed approaches out there? There's no real strategic direction yet from IT, and so a lot of people are still not sure what's going on.
No, I think that's quite familiar. It's IoT has been a buzzword for 10-15 years and still is kind of moving down from the top of the hype curve. So we are seeing that the practical approaches are coming, and but we want to help the customer to make these practical solutions and hold their hand and make sure that we have the ecosystems in place, and also, as you mentioned, the business cases, which are really crucial for the customers and their decision makers to do the right strategy within IoT.
Absolutely. Okay, so and to wrap up on this session, it's been a very useful session. It'd be good to know, Praful, what would you say is the one thing from today's session discussion you want everyone just to remember and go away with?
I think industrial IoT is here, and it is a different era from automation in the past. It brings different value. One thing definitely is ROI is a big factor, and that's becoming more affordable and attractive in the area of industrial IoT, for corrosion monitoring being the biggest use case, among the biggest use cases. That's my view. Okay,
all right. Well, thank you, Praful, for that. So let's move on to the question and answers. We've got 15 minutes to wrap up the session, but there's plenty of healthy questions. If we don't get to all the questions, then we'll try and get back to you afterwards. So the first question is, could digitalization IT be used to reduce cost and move from CapEx to OpEx? when we're talking about asset integrity management. So it might be good to just understand that better. And Rohit, have you got any views on the CapEx OpEx model?
Yeah, typically, if you want to really charge a customer or create a commercial model, it has to be attractive enough for the customer in the current times. You see, there is a double whammy of pandemic and the low oil price regime. Right. So in this case, you have to share the pain with the customer and create a model which makes sense to them. So definitely converting the CapEx and so that the customer says, okay, this is a partner of choice for me because they understand my pain, and hence they are not charging me a lot of money for technology turnover upfront. However, they also understand the fact that over a longer period of time, you could get a better ROI from whatever investments you make, and they also understand, the partners do also understand the fact that the OpEx is the area to target to in this kind of environment.
Okay, thank you. And again, Ollie, have you come across different types of models, or what do you see as being favoured and used in the IoT space?
Yeah, absolutely. It's of course there has traditionally been kind of a capex model where you invest in hardware and you have licenses, user licenses, and so on. But there is a really strong drive towards everything as a service, also in the IoT world. And in the end, also that makes kind of the business cases much easier because the end customer does not have to calculate the lifetime of equipment and so on. They know a monthly fee or a yearly fee or whatever, and you don't have to do these calculations on the lifetime, which could be really difficult sometimes in a very fast-moving world when it comes to technology and hardware.
Okay, thank you. So let's pose a question to Praful. Thank you, Mahmood, for the question. Sensors are good and advanced technology, but are they cost effective to be installed in existing structures? And how many sensors would you need to cover 100 meter of insulated pipe? So I presume we're focusing there on CUI sensors. Praful, are you able to answer that, please?
Yeah, I mean, great. I think that's where the difference is, that now the new sensors which have come up are able to handle this question about cost effectiveness installment on the existing sensors. So corrosion radar is an example where the CUI is being monitored with sensors, and it has come up with the longest sensor available in the market, which makes it much more wider area coverage at a more affordable cost, because the coverage is much higher. For example, if you take a 100-meter pipeline, normally it may take, say, hundreds of thousands of dollars to just inspect those pipelines because of a scaffolding. But if you have sensors installed, you will just go targeted 1 or 2 meters to inspect which are priority regions. Now, this is the cost value and affordability advantage. How many sensors for 100 meters? As far as corrosion radar is concerned, it's 100 meters per sensor per electronics. That's per unit. That's an example where a simple unit can cover a whole larger area.
Okay, so that's interesting. You don't necessarily have to apply lots of hardware across that 100-meter pipe. You can actually look at more long-range type technologies. Okay, so we got also a couple of questions which I think is asking the same thing around, are there any digitization guidelines for the oil and gas industry? Ollie, Rohit, are you aware of any guidelines around digitalization in the oil and gas industry? I think probably focus more on IoT.
I think the guidelines are more around the data, right, and the data privacy, how the data has to be consumed. Sensor data has traditionally in Europe has been one of the most regulated data types, right? So if there are any guidelines around digitalization, they would certainly be somewhere around, how the data traverses through network layers and how it has to be consumed and monitored. The important factor being security and the interfaces required for this kind of data, right? And potential threats to the data. So I guess with TAMPnet, that area gets addressed because of the inbuilt security.
And thank you, Rohit. And just looking at a question which is, I suppose, elaborating on these standards. But TAMPnet comes across, obviously TAMPnet is in the North Sea and Gulf of Mexico and has a offshore platform infrastructure. But we're talking at a concept level here about the connected sensors. But what's your view? Because we have people from the downstream online. Are we talking about the same thing for downstream as we're talking for upstream offshore? Are the standards for IoT and associated CI for downstream, or any initiatives like Sensors and Service Marketplace? Ollie, are you able to answer that, please?
Well, basically, there are some frameworks and recommendations as such. Part of what we're doing in establishing the ecosystems with LTI is to take kind of the business experience and make some frameworks and blueprints for the deployment. There is a lot of kind of thoughts and work done on the architecture. But there are, of course, you need to apply to kind of the EX and ATEX standards for hazarded areas and so on. But there are not so many standards, kind of standard deployment frameworks in place. So that's also what we do with the use cases to make sure that we kind of make the blueprints and recommendations for the customer to have kind of the validated designs, basically, to ensure that there is a short time to deployment. So but there's no kind of very clear industry standard of deploying this. Okay.
And Rohit, what's your experience, involvement in the downstream from an LTI perspective? There's similar initiatives for downstream.
Yeah, from perspective of the ecosystem that we built, there's no major difference, right, for upstream as well as downstream, as far as some of the use cases are concerned. I would look at it from perspective of how are you going to address the problem and how fast are you going to deliver the ROI. That's how it has to be looked at. So frankly, if you have connectivity available and if you've sorted out all the solution components, I don't see much of a difference, except for the fact that the accessibility may help you achieve your ROI much better, much quickly, right? So yeah, that's how I look at it.
It's good to understand the applications for both upstream and downstream.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve, for your question. Steve has mentioned what about capital projects and execution of capital projects. I didn't think there were any capital projects going on at the moment, but I'm sure there are some. So Steve, you asked, what are the panel doing to promote application of connected sensors in the execution of capital projects? Engaging with the owner operators and EPC contractors. So it'd be good to understand that, Rohit.
Yep. So the ecosystem actually addresses all spheres of the industry. EPC contractors and typically the use cases are centered around remote inspections. If you look at remote inspections in EPC industry, drones have been proven to be very successful. For the large surveys, etc., or inspections use case, the applications that you would look at, they would be able to provide you the right kind of health monitoring checks, as well as the right kind of pictures to be able to conduct the inspections from onshore. Right. So if you have any projects, right, we could leverage our ecosystem to showcase how the sensors, etc., are valid for a specific use case. So you pick up any example today. One of the major outgo of the industry is from operators is on the side of inspections, a third-party expense, right? So it's an opportunity for the third-party inspection companies to actually create an onshore model as well, so that the POB cost can be reduced from offshore, right? So you would notice that most of the large players today in the inspection space are creating such models valid for all spheres of the industry, wherein the person can actually do a lot of inspection from the sensor data, as well as looking at it from onshore. So you could be talking about a digital command center, so to say, where you could look at photographs being published across the connectivity, 4G connectivity provided by TAMPnet, or in the case of downstream, you get to see a lot of insights through the sensor data as well. Right, so I think EPC, there's an opportunity in the area of surveys and large remote scale, remote inspections.
Absolutely, and Praful, thank you. And Praful, you must have seen opportunities in the new build space in regards to companies wanting to move towards more unmanned operations.
I mean, that's the oil industry have recognized in general the digitalization benefits, and the possibility of remote operations are not only being talked about but being acted upon. And this probably a few years back, 3, 4, 5 years back, the companies planned for it, and now they are making it reality. We know some of the platforms in the North Sea which are being built now, still being built, and then deployed, and they are completely remote operations, mainly from the perspective of how to reduce manpower to live on the platform if there's no need, reduce the manpower, how to reduce travel. And this also goes not only from health and safety perspective, reduction of the cost perspective, but also net zero, unnecessary wastage of any efforts to be minimized. And all these technologies of IoT, corrosion monitoring being a use case or any other use case, if the data can be provided remotely, why to send person there? So that's we are here with that.
I'm glad you said net zero. I think everyone needs to mention net zero when we talk about any new application. So thank you for that, Praful. I'm conscious of time, but there is plenty more questions to get through. But let's just finish off with a question around why are we targeting IoT sensors, hardware devices, for up to 20 years when the average service time in downstream is 5 years? So does that make sense to you, Ollie?
Well, yes, it does. Of course, as we've discussed, there is basically a revolution going on within the IoT industry. There will be, of course, hardware that could be living on for 20 years, basically measuring and reporting data. But as you say, there is a completely new dynamic happening in the industry as well. So I think we'll see a large variety of hardware, sensors, and applications based on some platforms being static, some moving about. There could be drilling contracts that last only 1 or 2 years. But still, I think the assets will have kind of much of the same deployments, even if they can move about for new contracts. So often there will be need for the sensors for a longer scope, even if the contract is only for 1 or 2 or 3 years. It could be reused for later projects.
Okay, that's a good answer to what is a good question, and I can understand that people might have reservations with that. But thank you, Ollie. That was good to know. And we won't have a chance to go through all the rest of the questions. I'm going to have to probably wrap up, probably because I expect my children to come back from school in a minute now, and I don't want there to be lots of commotion. So we do need to wrap up now. So let's just ask Rohit, if there's one thing you want people just to go away with, what is it from this session, Rohit?
I think the current environment has presented us an opportunity to have a relook at the ROI and the time duration required for success of IIoT projects, right?
Okay,
and
thank you.
That's what I would look at.
And maybe one thing from Praful, because there is a question around, is there actually any commercially available IoT-enabled systems for CUI monitoring? So maybe Ollie, are you able to pick that up, or Praful?
You want to go, Praful, first?
Well, IoT for CUI is a big use case of IoT and automation. Something which can be manual is automated is always beneficial. The people who are doing manual can actually focus more on value-added services like analytics. and we are in that era now.
And I presume there are other solutions coming from different angles and different use cases commercially available now, or certainly in development.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
And so, of course, Ollie, Sensor as a Service Marketplace, delivered by Tampnet. Sounds like a great initiative. Thank you for the introduction. What is the one thing that you just want everyone to remember?
Well, of course, being an telecoms operator, we are all about the connectivity, and if we want to deploy, and as the trend is, there will be a huge deployments of IoT. The numbers like Equinor, for example, have stated that they will have 6 million sensors in quite a few years, and that requires sensors that are wireless connected. So we are building the networks that could comprise a huge number of sensors in the 10,000s or 100,000s within kind of a 4G network based on narrowband IoT and LTM and so on, which are typical specific IoT standards to handle that amount of sensors. So connectivity is really important, and of course, especially if you want to do remote operations as well, the connectivity needs to have low latency and high bandwidth to ensure that you have the true real-time experience of the remote monitoring.
Thank you. So thank you for that wrap up, and thank you to all of you on the panel. When I think about the Man United Ole Gunnar Solskjaer song in my head, or think about Tampnet and yourself, Ollie. So thank you for that. So let's wrap up. This is a close to CUI over Coffee Season 2, Session 1. Thank you for an interesting discussion and questions. Sorry we can't get across all the questions, but we all have an important role, not to look at CUI in our own silos and domain, but to think about the ecosystem that is available to us too, and to improve collaboration within that ecosystem. Our next CUI over Coffee is in 3 weeks' time, and we'll be able to bring you a sequel to Connected Sensors with an automation company called Yokogawa, a global corporation, Yokogawa, who have a different probably story to say around connectivity. And if you have got any more questions, feel free to ask those at webinars@corrosionradar.com. Stay safe and well, and speak to you soon. All the best. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everyone. And I'm done with my mate as well. Thank you.